Hello and welcome back to a very informative look as to what's going on around us. I just received an alert on my phone sharing that the governor or the mayor of Washington, D.C. has declared a 6 p.m. curfew. And I wondered what was going on. And then I got a call from someone that alerted me, turn on the news. And this is what I see on our news.
What we're looking at.
Well, spending hours today with some of the Trump supporters who are now protesters, the president repeatedly urged them to fight. And he meant that metaphorically, but he also may have meant that in this kind of show and demonstration. He repeated.
And now what I want to say to you is that I don't own the rights to this footage. This footage is being broadcasted live in the United States of America on NBC News right now. And I don't own the footage or anything that they're showing, but it's very important that you see what's going on right here in this country, because never in the history of this country has anything been done to this magnitude.
He has just tweeted again in the last few minutes, and he says, I am asking everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful. No violence. Remember, we in uppercase are the party of law and order. Respect the law and order of our great men and women in blue. Thank you. But this is the same president who repeatedly told them to fight, repeatedly told his supporters that he was robbed of this election, and they were too, that their votes were discounted, manipulated, thrown out by various states, things that have not been supported by the facts, and in many ways incited this kind of fervor. The president always measures how he is being perceived by his crowd size, and there was an enormous crowd today. And as you could see this play out, as Ellison pointed out, certainly there were families there. There were several people with dogs. I'm one of those dog people who always talks to the people who are walking their dogs with these kinds of events. And there were the flags, and there were all of the things that in a typical Trump rally environment before the election were much more upbeat. These folks were determined to walk to the Capitol and to make their message known. Many of them probably did not know it was going to turn into this, but clearly some people planned this kind of breach of the Capitol, and in many ways the kind of images that Frank, our colleague, was just showing us, a disrespect of these institutions that they are angry about. There was so much talk today among Trump supporters and those speaking at the rally prior to the president about anger toward even Republicans, believing that there were Republicans who were not standing up for President Trump. And of course, we heard the president repeatedly urge Mike Pence, his vice president, who has been unfailingly loyal for 4 years, to do what the president wanted today. Mike Pence did not do that in a lengthy statement where he explained what he believes to be the limits constitutionally of his role. And now we have this with an uncertain way of how this gets resolved. Today is the day the counts are supposed to be completed. That has been disrupted. As Frank and other colleagues have described, the scene at the Capitol remains tense, volatile, and unknown. I've been in touch with various elected officials that I know from my time covering the Capitol. All have said they are safe, but in a new world, imagine. It was predicted, and yet still so hard to imagine as we watch this unfold. Lester?
All right, Kelly, thanks very much for that. As we watch the live pictures, this is the east front of the Capitol, and that crowd continuing to occupy the steps and surrounding the entrance there. On the phone with us, we're going to try again, Democratic Congresswoman from Virginia, Abigail Spanberger. Congresswoman, can you tell us, are you safe and in an okay place right now?
Yes, thank you so much, Lester. I am. I'm in a holding room with a lot of other members of Congress after we were evacuated out of the floor in the gallery area.
Can you tell us how things played out when you became aware of that the Capitol had been breached and how you were let out?
So we initially got alert on our phone. The Capitol Police were just extraordinary in keeping us updated. We all got out our gas masks, which are under the seats on the floor and in the gallery, because we know that there was some chemical irritants that were deployed in various parts of the Capitol. And so we made a couple efforts at trying to evacuate, but at one point that became difficult because there were people banging on the doors of the floor of the House of Representatives. And so at that point in time, there was an effort to, of course, lock all the doors and barricade the doors. And it took multiple efforts for us to be able to make our way safely and then depart the Capitol and gallery areas where we were gathered to participate in what is our constitutional duty of counting electors. It's a straightforward process that is supposed to be procedural, but one that we were intending to carry out today until it was interrupted.
Did you come face to face with any of the protesters?
I did not. Where we were on our way out, there were protesters who were laid out in the prone position. Capitol Police had clearly taken control of the situation, and as they were leading us and members of the press out, that was at that point as close as we got, kind of person to person.
Were you and your colleagues wearing gas masks as you were leaving?
Some people were. So we all had them. We had them opened. We had them deployed. There was some people were saying that we needed to put them on. Some didn't have them on, but everybody was ready because, again, in the end, the way we actually evacuated out of the gallery, we did not go in the direction where there was the chemical irritant. And so I had mine on for a bit, but mostly had it off and didn't come in contact with any of the irritant.
All right, well, we're glad you're okay. So let's talk now about what we are seeing, what is happening outside the Capitol. Give me your thoughts, how we got here, and where do we go forward?
I'm a former intelligence officer, and my whole background is understanding the challenges that foreign governments are facing. The scene that we saw on Capitol Hill, the banging, the yelling, the screaming, the demands to enter the chamber of the United States Congress, those are the sorts of things that happen in third world nations, the sorts of places where our diplomats and intelligence officers write home to the United States and say, this is a dangerous scenario. This is an endangered democracy. It's deeply, deeply disturbing what we saw at the U.S. Capitol today. And but my appreciation to the Capitol Police for doing everything they possibly could to keep us, our staff, our teams, the cafeteria workers, sanitation workers, and employees of the Capitol and members of the press safe as they worked to systematically ensure that active threats were subdued and that we could get to a safe place.
All right, Representative Abigail Spanberger from Virginia, thank you for taking some time to speak with us. We're glad you and your colleagues are okay.
Never in the history of time has this happened, even when there was racial divides in the country. There was never a flood of people going to the Capitol, breaking in the Capitol, and placing people in harm's way. If you're in the area, I want to say to you, please be careful, avoid the area if you can. And we do not own the rights to the footage. The credit is to NBC News. Thank you for illustrating this as quickly as possible to ensure that people are safe and stay out of harm's way.
33 years ago that guides the process. Now, it doesn't say it has to end today, but it has to start today. So it's met that constitutional requirement. And of course, at some point when this is all resolved, it's going to resume. And it doesn't really matter how long it takes. I mean, they've got until the 20th, obviously, which is Inauguration Day. A couple of thoughts, Lester. Number one, this scene is obviously going to cause some serious rethinking about how the inauguration itself will be planned. Now, we knew it was already scaled back because of the pandemic, no parade, for example, but you just know, and I just got off the phone with one law enforcement person, they're looking at these scenes and thinking, well, what changes do they need to make in the plan for the inaugural? Now, I will say that an inauguration is a much bigger
aware
event that
of
involves
what is
many more
happening
law
at
enforcement
our Capitol
organizations.
here in the
There's
United
much tighter
States? Question
security,
mark.
but still, there's got to be some rethinking. One other thing, Lester, we've been told now by two separate law enforcement organizations. You saw a picture earlier of a person being wheeled out of the Capitol, or at least being wheeled outside the Capitol on a gurney with apparent injuries. And we're told now by two separate law enforcement agencies that one person was shot inside the U.S. Capitol a short time ago by a member of law enforcement. Now, we don't know what law enforcement person this was, or whether it was someone from the Capitol Police, from Metro Police. I mean, there are a number of different police agencies that are responsible for security in that area. And when there is something like this, there's an all hands on deck kind of response from a number of different police agencies that can respond to help, police and federal agencies. So we don't know which organization was involved, but and we don't know what the condition of the person who was shot, and we don't know the circumstances of it. All I can report is that law enforcement officials tell us that one person was shot inside the U.S. Capitol by a member of law enforcement.
All right, Pete Williams, thank you for adding that. It's extraordinary that we have not, there's right now, it seems to be no effort, at least from the outside, to remove anyone. But at the same time, no one here is advancing. The picture has remained rather constant here on both sides of the Capitol. People crowded in, waving flags, essentially moving their rally to the doorsteps of the Capitol as members of Congress have been ushered to safe places. We heard a description a moment ago of reaching for gas masks that had positioned at their desks, and some of them actually donning them as they made their way to safer areas, still hearing the beating of people trying to get in the door. So an extraordinary scene continuing to unfold there. Let me bring in, if I can right now, Hallie Jackson again. Hallie, you've been watching all this play out. Is this a fear that you had heard expressed, from those associated with the White House, that something like this could happen?
Here's the thing, Lester, for people who have tracked movements in many ways among people, sort of the fringe elements of what you could call the president's base, there had been discussion of this day specifically for a while now, right? Which is raising the question, as Pete's talked about, and as others, of the law enforcement presence. That is obviously something that, as you showed on that shot, you could see some of the presence here at the Capitol, but this just incredibly upsetting, I think it's fair to say, scene at the Capitol. I will say that you are now seeing more and more, Lester, people who are close to the president, and I'm going to try to pull this up. Mick Mulvaney, I believe, is among them, calling on the president to say something. His allies, his aides, getting out there on Twitter, saying, hey, stop. This is not okay. This is not appropriate. This is not who we are. The president's former campaign manager, for example, doing the same. But now there are some who are pushing the president publicly, Lester, to try to come out and do something more forcefully. This is a president who, as our colleague Kelly O'Donnell noted, ended his speech at the rally, what was then a rally several hours ago, earlier this morning, by telling people we're going to walk up to the Capitol, basically. Amping them up, to use that kind of language, to come up to the Capitol. And what was, and I was on Capitol Hill, Lester, not 3-4 hours ago, and I'm telling you, I saw from our own eyes, didn't look like this. Obviously, it was a mostly peaceful protest. It has turned into something very different, much uglier now. You will see moving forward discussion about what the president has been doing, where he has been for these last 2 hours, for these last 2.5 hours. And the moment of leadership, there will be critics who will suggest that the president has not met some of those moments in the past. But now you're seeing even some of his allies talk about this. For example, Kevin McCarthy, of course, the minority leader over on the House side, sounding rather shaken. He was over on another network calling this un-American, suggesting that, yes, he would perhaps have people reach out to the president and see if he would do more. Now, the president has tweeted two tweets in the couple of hours that we've been watching this. But the leadership factor on this is going to be critical. The other point that I want to make, Lester, I live in Washington. That's obviously where I'm reporting to you from now. It's 3:30 in the afternoon. It will get dark in a matter of 90 minutes or so. And you still have thousands of people out on the west front and the east front of the Capitol. They've got to clear these folks before this situation potentially gets even more disturbing. I can tell you that I know people who are having their kids, who don't have anything to do with Capitol Hill, who are having their kids affected because of the lockdowns that have been in place now, their families. This is a ripple effect. It's why you've seen the mayor of Washington institute that 6 o'clock curfew. And at that point, that could be a potential tension point, Lester, if in fact these people who are storming the Capitol are still out there.
Hallie, thank you. I want to bring in Andrea Mitchell right now. Andrea,
this goes back to what I was saying earlier. The 6 p.m. curfew has been put in place by the mayor of Washington, D.C. So if you're in any of these areas, please be safe and please make sure you get out of those areas as soon as possible, because we don't know what may happen next in the wake of what's going on. So with no further ado, we're going to go back to the broadcast with NBC News. And again, I do not own the footage here. I give credit to NBC News as they are covering what's happening here at the nation's capital. So we're going back to the special report.
Talking earlier, interviewing Terry Gaynor, the former head of the Capitol Police, former sergeant at arms, and he said they will, bit by bit, they will move enough people in. They have, more than 1,000 Capitol Police. Clearly, they did not prevent the Capitol building from being breached on the second floor level, as you saw on the east front. That was where they got in, apparently, to both the Senate and the House floor and to the same level as Statuary Hall. So what you saw with these protesters in the chambers, in the Senate chamber, in the House chamber, thankfully, the Capitol Police had removed Vice President Pence, certainly Senator Pro Tem Chuck Grassley, who's also in the succession chain. Also the Speaker of the House, we understand, all of them, all the senators are now in safe places. You have members of the House and others who were off the floor because of COVID, not part of the joint session, who were planning their speeches. We talked to Alyssa Slotkin from Michigan, who was planning her speech. She's a former Pentagon and CIA official who has served in Iraq. At the same time, saying she's never even contemplated anything like this. And what she said was, you expect attacks in places like Iraq in wartime. You don't expect it in the Capitol building of the United States. The only time I've ever seen the Capitol evacuated was after 9/11, when we thought that plane was coming, the plane that ended up, heading towards Pennsylvania. We thought that plane, I believe it was that plane, was coming to the Capitol building. And that's when they were evacuated through a tunnel and safely further up Independence Avenue. So I've never seen anything like this, and I have to say, it is shocking, and it was started really by the President of the United States inciting that crowd, and that is as shocking as the failure of the police to prevent the Capitol building from being breached.
And so, as always, I try to ask people to like, share, start watch parties. Please share this with people, friends and family that you may know and love that may be in the area, so that they can clear out, or if they're headed that way, so that they can be diverted. Because the fact of the matter is that so many people are not even aware of what's going on right now at the nation's capital. I live here in Washington, D.C., and was not aware until I got a phone call from my family member telling me what was going on. So please share this broadcast, let people know what's going on. And remember, I do not own the rights to this footage. I credit NBC News here in Washington, D.C. for the great coverage that they're providing. And so I welcome all viewers to our emergency awareness show here at Lotus Richey Ignite. So please be safe and avoid this area if you can. And please share this broadcast. Let people know what's going on here in Washington, D.C. And please ask them to stay away from that area, to stay clear. And remember, there is a 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time curfew. So make sure that you are in your home by 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is a curfew that the mayor has requested so that he can keep order here in Washington, D.C. Now we're going back to the broadcast.
So questions about what the Defense Department may do in that instance, we are waiting to find out and are in touch with the Speaker's office. But it has been an incredibly difficult day here on Capitol Hill. It started, of course, with the initial proceedings to begin the process to ratify President-elect Joe Biden as President of the United States. That all unfolded, it seemed, as it should have at the beginning. But of course, these protesters approached the building, ultimately breached the Capitol, and then breached the House and Senate floors, which is not something I don't think anyone who was walking into this building today anticipated. And certainly those of us who have been working up here every day for many, many years now have never seen anything like this before. So you are seeing increasingly Republicans coming out and calling on President Trump to urge the people who are here to stand down. Kevin McCarthy, the House leader, was recently interviewed on Fox News. He called it un-American. He said it needs to stop. He said that he didn't even want to talk about some of the things that he had seen in the chamber. He referenced shots fired, and I know our Pete Williams reported that. Our producer Haley Talbot was in the House of Representatives in the gallery watching the floor as events unfolded there, as the Capitol Police barricaded one of the doors as they evacuated members of the House of Representatives. Some of those members donning gas masks that are situated under the chairs in that chamber because there were chemical irritants that were discharged in the attempts to try and clear these protests. So at this point, we do know members of congressional leadership are safe. Members of the House and Senate are being taken to undisclosed locations, most of them already in those undisclosed locations if they weren't part of those initial groups. I've texted with several members of the Senate who have said that they are safe, that they feel safe at this point. So it does seem as though that element of this has been diffused. At least the last few minutes here have felt more like stasis. The members who are involved in the actual functioning of our government have been removed from the immediate danger of the situation. And now the question is, how are they going to move forward and secure the building? So we are here in the Russell Senate office building, where things have been largely quiet. Across the street, of course, the Capitol building, where you can see those protesters still milling around. But again, Savannah, important to underscore, this has halted the process, the regular process of our government.
Yeah, Casey, that's where I was going. I mean, this is January 6th. This is a date that was in stone. This is when you're supposed to certify the electors for the transition of power. I mean, that obviously is not possible right now. I heard one congressman on one of the cable networks saying, a Republican congressman, a Trump supporter, saying he wants the president to say, call it off, to do more, to say more right now. So far, as this has unfolded, at first we saw a tweet from the president talking about how Mike Pence, the vice president, had let him down by not doing something that was not within his power to do. But then he also has said we should support our law enforcement. But he has, Casey, to be clear, we haven't heard the president say to these protesters, stop, it's over, as this Republican Congressman Trump supporter has said he wishes the president would do now.
And you're absolutely right. And there are more Republicans who are saying that is exactly what needs to happen. Senator Marco Rubio is saying that is what it would mean to support law enforcement. Law enforcement have been overrun here. And the reality is that this is supposed to be a formal transfer of power from one administration to the next. And in fact, Senator Mitch McConnell was on the floor of the Senate, someone who critics, have said waited too long to criticize President Trump. But even he this morning was saying we have to believe these results. If we don't, then our democracy is going to begin a decline. A death spiral was the phrase that he used. So that's how we started the day. And then just minutes later, this scene unfolds in the United States Capitol, which, again, I think it's important to realize most of these procedures are laid out in the Constitution. They are some of the oldest things that govern how we govern ourselves, how we work as a democracy. It's certainly something that I know many members of Congress who I talk to every day have taken great pride in being a part of that democracy. And right now we're seeing it halted by these people.
Absolutely. Casey, sorry to cut you off. I want to jump to a member of Congress, Brendan Boyle, who's a Democrat from Pennsylvania. I believe he's on the phone. Congressman, I mean, first of all, are you safe? Are you okay? I don't expect you to tell us where you are, but what can you tell us about how you're doing right now?
Yeah, well, thank you. I am safe myself and a few other younger staffers I'll just say in my office, the building in which my office is located. Capitol Police have been running through the hallway, so you'll occasionally hear a commotion outside, and I'm not sure whether or not it's Capitol Police or one of the protesters, and then just continuing to wait on further updates from the Capitol Police.
And what did you witness today? What have you seen?
Well, I've obviously never seen anything like this before. And, it wasn't a surprise that we were going to have this large crowd of protesters. So it's still a mystery to me how this crowd was able, within about 10 or 12 minutes of starting, able to breach both sides of the Capitol, both the east side and the west side, and get into or right around the House chamber, as well as apparently from texts I'm getting from friends of mine who serve in the Senate, they were able to get into the Senate chamber as well. So that is just absolutely inexplicable to me that this happened. But ultimately, though, the bigger threat, in my view, is not the thousands of people who are here today, even though they're armed and they are a threat. The bigger threat is actually those who have incited them all along the way, cheering this on. That's the real threat.
Well, at this point, what are you hoping? How do you think this will be resolved? And do you think Congress will be able to complete its constitutional duty? I mean, even though there seems to be a moment right now of stasis, for lack of a better word, right now, the Capitol is not under control. It's still infiltrated by people who have broken through barriers and broken across the lines to come over and come inside the Capitol. I mean, look at the image. I don't know if you can see it. We're seeing people inside offices, ceremonial offices, and real working offices inside the Capitol who have barged in and having their way with the place. So assuming that this can be gotten under control, a law enforcement matter, would it be your hope that Congress reconvene today and try to complete its constitutional duty?
Well, I immediately have two thoughts. The first is it's absolutely sickening to see this militia or armed mob bring us to the point of anarchy. Never in 1,000 years did I ever think I would see this in the capital of the United States of America. But then my second thought is, I don't care how long I have to stay here. We are going to do our damn constitutional duty. There's no way I'm going to be chased off the capital of my own country by this mob and whoever is inciting them. Yes, we will do the people's duty. We will ensure our constitutional process, come hell or high water, is followed, and that Joe Biden is inaugurated as president of the United States on the 20th of January.
Well, Congressman Boyle, I appreciate your time this afternoon. Stay safe, and you, and also all of the congressional staffers, a lot of young men and women who work there at the Capitol and are never seen. I wish them well as well. Thank you for your time.
And so I'd like you to know that the views expressed from the NBC News broadcast are not necessarily the views of the Lotus Riche Ignites program. We are not responsible or liable for any of their statements. This broadcast is for education and awareness. Please make sure you share this broadcast to let people know to be safe and to stand clear of that area. There is also a 6 p.m. curfew that has been put in place by the mayor to keep people safe. So please make sure you stay aware. You can share this broadcast. You can, again, like, share, follow, and you can start a watch party. Again, I do not own the footage or the rights for this broadcast. I credit the NBC News here in Washington, D.C. for providing wonderful coverage. Now we're going to return back to the broadcast live and in action.
Trying to barricade a door. So the situation is extremely serious as it plays out right now. I want to go to Kristen Welker, who is at the White House. Kristen, I'd say all eyes of the world are trained on the White House, but right now the Capitol is the focus. But the answer could come from the White House. Are we getting anything beyond the tweets the president issued? Is there a growing chorus of calls for him to try to put a stop to this?
There is a growing chorus of calls. Lester, let me read you a tweet from Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, a little bit of breaking news here. She says, at real Donald Trump's direction, the National Guard is on the way, along with other federal protective services. We reiterate President Trump's call against violence and to remain peaceful. So there you have it. The National Guard has been deployed to Washington, D.C., to the Capitol to try to deal with these protests that are unfolding and this breach of the U.S. Capitol. Now, the messaging that we're getting from the White House, this is the latest from Vice President Mike Pence, who says the violence and destruction taking place at the U.S. Capitol must stop, and it must stop now. Anyone involved must respect law enforcement officers and immediately leave the building. Similar language from President Trump in a pair of tweets that he sent out earlier, Lester, but his supporters believe that that just does not go far enough, that they want to hear from President Trump himself, that they want him to come out and address his supporters and tell them, bottom line, stand down. Let me paint the scene for you at the White House right now, Lester. You have White House officials who are huddled in their offices, who are watching all of this unfold. I spoke with one official who told me that the president is watching this unfold as well. Of course, discussions about whether or not he is going to speak, whether there will be some type of written statement. But at this point, nothing on the horizon. So I think you are going to see the calls grow louder for him to come out and address these protesters. Lester.
All right. Thank you, Kristen. NBC News contributor and founder of Punchbowl News, Jake Sherman, joins us on the line. Jake, I understand you are in the Capitol. What can you see? What can you tell us?
Well, I can see nothing at the moment, Lester, because we've been in lockdown. I'm just going to not say where because I want to protect our safety. But I've been covering this building for 11 years. I've never obviously seen anything like this. I usually can't get through security with my AirPods or my belts, and these people have broken down doors. This is a mob. This is not a protest. This is an armed mob, and this is despicable and really, really, really unsafe. And we're all very scared.
Did you, I know you're in lockdown right now, but have you heard any of the protesters nearby?
Oh, yeah.
So for those of you that's just joining us, this is an emergency broadcast that I'm doing to present awareness for what's going on here in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol. Again, I do not own the rights to the broadcast. NBC is actually providing coverage, and there has been a curfew declared for 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in Washington, D.C. So please make sure if you have any friends, family, or loved ones in the Washington, D.C. area, you may want to let them know what's going on around the Capitol so they can stay away from that area, and also make sure that they're in their homes by 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, the views that are expressed are not my views. They are the views of the broadcast from NBC News, and therefore I am not liable or responsible for their statements. This broadcast is for education and awareness purposes. So please be sure to share this broadcast and let people know to avoid the area and to be safe. And so now we're going to return back to the broadcast as featured by NBC News.
You know, I've defended our Constitution for 23 years in their service, and now for 8 years here on the Capitol Hill, and I've never, in my wildest dreams, would I ever think that Americans would do this to our own nation's capital.
I mean, I'm sure you are seeing the images I'm seeing, the United States Senate, the floor of the United States Senate, the Congress being taken over by people who have breached barricades, who've gone past police, who are where they are not permitted to be. Have you gotten any kind of communication? I don't imagine all 100 senators are on a text chain, but have you heard anything from the leadership about the plan to get this back under control and what might happen in terms of the constitutional duty that Congress has today?
I am not. I've not heard anything directly from the Republican leader's office. I am getting information from my leadership team, who are following up on every one of us and where we are located, all the Democrats and those who caucus with us. And you know, again, listen, I my entire adult life had defended people's rights to protest. And peaceful protest is something that I absolutely support. But this is a mob. This is a riot. These are people who are not practicing democracy. In fact, they are, you know, doing the will of a wannabe tin pot dictator who lost the election. And this is no way for us to be running our country and really doing the work that needs to be done, which is fight a global pandemic and get working families back up on their feet again.
Senator, I mean, you're as tough as they come. As I mentioned, you are a wounded veteran who served our country. But was there any moment today when you were on your way to the Capitol and you were turned around in a rush? I mean, what went through your mind? Did you feel fear or concern or anxiety about your own safety?
You know, I don't. I did not feel fear or concern. I did what the Capitol Police asked me to do, because that is the best thing to do, is just to follow their direction and to take myself out of the equation so that I would be one less person they would have to worry about, and that they could concentrate on their jobs and focus on those who were breaching the Capitol. I will tell you this. These protesters will not stop me from carrying out my duties as have been laid out for me in the Constitution. And if we have to be here all night and all day tomorrow and the next day, we will continue to carry out the work that needs to be done. And I'm not going to be deterred from standing my ground. You know, I will not quit my post. I will be here and I will do the people's business.
Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, thank you for calling in. Stay safe. Keep us posted. We'll stay in touch with you. Appreciate it. Lester, over to you.
Thanks. I want to bring in Hallie Jackson right now, Savannah, who is, of course, is our chief White House correspondent. Hallie, you know, the president spoke to this crowd today. So much of what we've been hearing, of course, is that the inauguration will go on the 20th. Are there concerns that what's happening today could, obviously you can't move that date, but could have a tremendous effect on how we mark that day?
You can't imagine, Lester, that it's not going to, right? Or at least have a discussion or a conversation about that, given what we're seeing unfolding. I think to give people some perspective here, and remember, in inaugurations past, this is what happens. You have typically the president-elect on the west front of the Capitol. You have that sort of parade down Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House. Things had been changing and in flux very much anyway because of the pandemic. And by the way, it's a pandemic that is still very much happening and very much active currently. And the question now is, will this change even more on Inauguration Day, given the scene here, given the security and the safety perspective? One of the things that you have talked about, Lester, as you see these images, you said earlier you might feel sort of sick looking at that. It is stunning, I think, to people in this country, as well as to people in the international community. The head of NATO, the NATO Secretary General, calling these shocking scenes in Washington and saying the outcome of this democratic election must be respected. Lester, that is the kind of sentence that you hear aimed at other countries, not the United States, that you haven't ever heard aimed at the United States. To give you some perspective of the way that this is being seen and the way that it is being perceived and happening here in the United States and around the world as well. As far as the president goes, another one of his allies, again, more and more of his allies coming out now saying he needs to appear. There was a mention perhaps of, and we heard earlier some reporting, question marks, excuse me, as our studios are kind of going off here, I'm just going to hang this phone up, question marks on whether the president would deliver, for example, a written statement, a speech. A written statement isn't going to cut it at this point. And frankly, Lester, I think there is also a fair question of whether a formal deliverance of remarks from President Trump is enough to stop what's happening here, to get these rioters, frankly, to turn around and leave the Capitol. We know now, based on the reporting from our teams, that the National Guard and the press secretary has confirmed that the National Guard is coming in. You have other states now, neighboring states here, Maryland, Virginia, sending in the National Guard as well. The change of mission has been approved, as you see on the screen. I think it is also important to note, as we talk about the process, Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania saying, we are absolutely going to get this work done. Logistically, Lester, that is going to be almost impossible to do anytime in the immediate term future because of this unbelievable security breach that has happened. You cannot send members of Congress back into a House chamber that hasn't been swept. You can't send members of Congress back into offices where people who have not been screened are there, not just putting their feet up on the table, but doing, you just don't know. And that is an enormous security breach, as now we see this remarkable scene of this line of cars, police vehicles, law enforcement vehicles, lights and sirens on, coming down. I can't quite get my bearings from this chopper shot here as to which angle we're looking at, north or south. But this is obviously the main drag here heading into the Capitol on the Mall. The backup is coming. That seems to be what's happening here. And it is desperately needed at this moment because you still have to get these protesters cleared out if you're law enforcement. Okay, and I see the perspective there, Lester.
Yeah, and of course, a 6 p.m. curfew is now looming as we watch more security descend on the Capitol, preparing for whatever may come. And we should also note, before I hand it back over to Savannah, those pictures we've been seeing of people occupying offices and parts of the Capitol, those pictures are shocking, but it should also be noted they are potential evidence as well. Savannah?
No question about that for a later time, but
So, folks, this is not a hoax. This is real. I'm here in Washington, D.C., and this is really happening. And never in the history of this country have we seen anything like this. Never in the history of the country have we seen anything like this. The National Guard has been activated and they're already en route. Those of you that may be out in the Washington, D.C. area, I would suggest that you stay away from that area if at all possible. There has been a 6 p.m. curfew enacted by the mayor, asking people to please make sure they go home and stay home at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so those of you that are just joining, welcome to an emergency broadcast that I'm doing. This show is about awareness. So please be safe. Avoid the area if you can. Again, I don't own the rights to the footage. The credit goes totally to NBC News here in Washington, D.C. that is covering that we have had a terrible upset at the Capitol, and the Capitol has, from what NBC has shared, has been breached. So we're going to go right back to the broadcast. If you have loved ones, friends, or family members, please share with them to stay away from that area so that they can be safe. And please let them know that there's a 6 p.m. curfew that is in place for this evening, and the National Guard has been activated. So we're going to go right back to the broadcast by NBC.
Start today, but there's no limit in how long it takes. They'll keep going until they're done. And if they're not done by Inauguration Day, and I have no reason to think that they won't be, but if they're not, then there's procedures to have there's the Succession Act. The Speaker would become president temporarily until they can figure out who the president is, but which obviously will be Joe Biden. Now, on the law enforcement side, we've noted that one person was shot inside the U.S. Capitol by someone from law enforcement, not sure which agency that was. We've been told by law enforcement authorities that at least one improvised explosive device was found on the Capitol grounds, not inside a building, but on the Capitol grounds. And possibly a second item. We know that law enforcement people are looking at that. Earlier this afternoon, before we saw people storming the Capitol, the big concern was evacuation of the Library of Congress, which is directly across the street from the Capitol, and a portion of a House office building.
And Pete, in case we have not caught up on this note, Kayleigh McEnany, the press secretary for the White House, said that the National Guard is on the way along with other federal protective services. And she says, we reiterate President Trump's call against violence and to remain peaceful, but we have not heard from the president, not recently, not within the last few moments, asking folks who are gathered there at the Capitol to call it off and to stop. Let me go to Casey Hunt. Casey, obviously, first question is always what's happening there behind you, but also I know we've heard from the Democratic leaders of the House and Senate now.
We have, Savannah, and they are calling for the president to do just what you said he has not yet done, which is to demand that all protesters leave the U.S. Capitol and Capitol grounds immediately. That is a joint statement from the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, and the Minority Leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer. Now, I can also tell you, Savannah, that what has started today as fear, chaos, uncertainty about what was going on is hardening into resolve and determination to get the government back on track. So one member who is at the secure location where they've taken members of the House tells me that one Democrat and one Republican, Hakeem Jeffries, the Democrat, Liz Cheney, the Republican, informed those members on lockdown that the National Guard is on the way. There was applause in the room, and this member said to me that we will return to the floor and do our jobs, was the quote. I also heard from a member of the Senate who was also taken to the Senate side secure location. This member is safe. This member also told me that these thugs will not win the day, essentially, that they are prepared to go back onto the Senate floor. Senator Joe Manchin telling me we're all okay and ready to get back to our chamber and finish our work. These thugs cannot and will not run us off. We will continue to govern. And yes, Savannah.
Oh, I wanted to try to understand because, we just talked to Senator Duckworth. It sounded like she was in her office. Everybody wasn't, all 535 members of Congress weren't all there at the same time. But are there various locations where there are groups of senators or groups of congressmen sheltering together? Did I catch that?
Yes, that's right. So it's a little bit complicated, and it depends on where you were when this started to unfold. So we saw the joint session begin this process. Then the House and the Senate separated to their respective chambers, and they started debating this question. And it was during that point that protesters breached the Capitol, and they eventually, of course, breached the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate. So because of coronavirus, not everyone is allowed in the chambers at the same time. Normally, of course, there are 435 members of the House, 100 members of the Senate. All of them have a chair or a desk. But with social distancing, you can't do that. So that means that groups of members were scattered in different places when this all unfolded. Many of the senators had just processed back across the Capitol. They had started their debate in the Senate chamber. So there was I would say a higher proportion of the chamber was present over on the Senate side. And then you also had a bunch of House members still on the floor of the House. And as it unfolded, and we had the video, in fact, that you're watching right now is from Haley Talbot, who's our producer, who was inside the chamber as this was unfolding. She was with some members who were up there in the gallery. That's the level that's above the House floor as they were all being evacuated. So many of those members were taken together in a group to a different location in the Capitol complex. We happen to know where this one is, but we're not reporting it because obviously there are many security concerns about that. The Senate, meanwhile, had a similar situation. There were members on the floor who were evacuated together. So those members are also telling me, I've talked to a couple of them, I know they're in the same place. We don't know where they are, but we do know that they are safe and that a number of them are together. Then, of course, if you were a member who was not on the floor and not part of that escort from Capitol Police, you may be at any other place, your office building, your own personal office. So that's kind of how these things are set up here.
Got it. Casey, got to jump. Let's listen to the President-elect Joe Biden.
Late coming out to speak to you. I initially was going to talk about the economy, but all of you have been watching what I've been watching. At this hour, our democracy is under an unprecedented assault, unlike anything we've seen in modern times. An assault on the citadel of liberty, the Capitol itself. An assault on the people's representatives, from the Capitol Hill Police sworn to protect them. And the public servants who work at the heart of our republic. An assault on the rule of law like few times we've ever seen it. An assault on the most sacred of American undertakings, the doing of the people's business. Let me be very clear. The scenes of chaos at the Capitol do not reflect a true America, do not represent who we are. What we're seeing are a small number of extremists dedicated to lawlessness. This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition. And it must end now. I call on this mob to pull back and allow the work of democracy to go forward. You've heard me say before in different contexts, the words of a president matter, no matter how good or bad that president is. At their best, the words of a president can inspire. At their worst, they can incite. And therefore, I call on President Trump to go on national television now to fulfill his oath and defend the Constitution and demand an end to this siege, to storm the Capitol, to smash windows, to occupy offices, the floor of the United States Senate, rummaging through desks, on the Capitol, on the House of Representatives, threatening the safety of duly elected officials. It's not protest, it's insurrection. The world's watching. Like so many other Americans, I am genuinely shocked and saddened that our nation, so long the beacon of light and hope for democracy, has come to such a dark moment. Through war and strife, America's endured much. And we will endure here, and we will prevail again, and will prevail now. The work of the moment and the work of the next 4 years must be the restoration of democracy, of decency, honor, respect, the rule of law, just plain, simple decency. The renewal of the politics. It's about solving problems, looking out for one another, not stoking the flames of hate and chaos. As I said, America is about honor, decency, respect, tolerance. That's who we are. That's who we've always been. The certification of the Electoral College vote is supposed to be a sacred ritual to reaffirm. The purpose is to affirm the majesty of American democracy. But today's a reminder, a painful one, that democracy is fragile, and to preserve it requires people of goodwill, leaders with the courage to stand up, who are devoted not to the pursuit of power, or the personal interest pursuits of their own selfish interest at any cost, but of the common good. Think what our children watching television are thinking. Think what the rest of the world is looking at. For nearly 2.5 centuries, we, the people, in search of a more perfect union, have kept our eyes on that common good. America is so much better than what we've seen today. Watching the scenes from the Capitol, I was reminded, as I prepared other speeches in the past, I was reminded of the words of Abraham Lincoln in his annual message to Congress, whose work has today been interrupted by chaos. Here's what Lincoln said. He said, "We shall nobly save or merely lose the last best hope on earth. Went on to say, the way is plain, peaceful, generous, just, a way which, if followed, the world will forever applaud and God must forever bless. The way is plain here, too. That's who we are. It's the way of democracy, of respect, of decency, of honor, and commitment as patriots to this nation. Notwithstanding what I saw today and we're seeing today, I remain optimistic about the incredible opportunities. There has never been anything we can't do when we do it together. And this god-awful display today is bringing home to every Republican and Democrat and Independent in the nation that we must step up. This is the United States of America. There's never, ever, 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 ever been a thing we've tried to do that we've done it together. We've not been able to do it. So, President Trump, step up. May God bless America. May God protect our troops and all those folks at the Capitol who are trying to preserve order. Thank you, and I'm sorry to have kept you waiting.
We've seen today President-elect Joe Biden calling on President Trump to step up, calling what's happening at the Capitol right now a democracy under assault, and calling on the president to go on national TV to call for an end of the violence we've seen in and outside the U.S. Capitol tonight. An extraordinary moment. Joe Biden actually making a few comments. Okay, as he departs the stage, enough is enough is enough. Joe Biden, who has at times during this period leading up to his inauguration played the de facto healer in chief, once again taking that role under circumstances that probably even he couldn't have imagined. What we're seeing today, supporters of the president who have stormed the U.S. Capitol, who have desecrated parts of the Capitol. We've seen it in a series of photos. Just before we went to the president-elect, we should note some other major news taking place, somewhat related to all this. NBC News now projecting that Jon Ossoff, the Democrat, will win the Senate runoff in the state of Georgia. And that leads to the projection that Democrats will regain control of the U.S. Senate. It'll be a 50-50 split. Vice President Kamala Harris, Vice President-elect, as Vice President, will have the tie-breaking vote. So that just breaking here a few moments ago before we went to Joe Biden. Let's go back to Hallie Jackson right now, who can give us some more insight as to what is happening there in Washington as the light begins to dim.
As it begins to get dark here, Lester, I can tell you that it appears we are going to be hearing from President Trump at some point in the coming hours. I'm told just moments ago by a senior administration official that the president will have a taped message coming shortly, presumably, of course, one would imagine, to address the chaotic, difficult, mob-like scene that we have seen at the Capitol outside and inside, as we're playing now some of that video from earlier of the protesters storming the steps. We still do not know. I have no clarity on remarks, for example, the content of those, what specifically the president might say. But you have to remember, he has had people close to him, people who are his Republican allies, publicly now call on him to do something, not just Joe Biden, right? Not just what we heard from the president-elect, who is ending his remarks and very clearly saying, time to step up, President Trump. It appears we will hear something from the president. Of course, Lester, this could go in various directions, right? Presumably, you have to think that the president will, in fact, call on these now rioters to stop, to abandon this this so-called mission to turn around and to leave, particularly now as we are coming within just an hour and 45 minutes of this curfew happening. So that's one piece of it. But Lester, this is also a president who over the last 2 weeks, it can be said fairly and objectively, has worked to spread misinformation repeatedly about the election's results, repeatedly calling on his own vice president to try to, in my words here, mess with the results of this electoral college vote count. The vice president does not have the authority to do that. The president has repeatedly insisted he has won states, specifically, for example, Georgia, that he did not win in this election. The president has repeatedly insisted that he is, in fact, the person who should legitimately be inaugurated, take office, continue to keep office after January 20th. That is not accurate. That's not true. That's not correct. That's not what's happening. The president may have a platform here with the world watching him to continue to make those false and misleading and inaccurate and troubling claims. We talk about the world watching, Lester. I have to tell you, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, is reacting to this as well, calling what you're seeing on the screen now disgraceful scenes in the United States. He's continuing that the U.S. stands for democracy around the world. It is now vital that there should be a peaceful and orderly transfer of power. You now have international allies of the president calling on the president to give up the fight, basically, to give up the game, to say that it is over. And Lester, I think that is perhaps the only thing that is going to get these people out of the Capitol. And I have to tell you, I'm not even sure that that is 100% going to do it here. Time is of the essence. And so we will, of course, be watching to see when that message, again, as I'm being told by a source familiar with that message, will be taped and will be coming out soon, Lester.
And you guys could not hear me just then. But as I said, this is Lotus Roche. I'm broadcasting live here in Washington, D.C. This is where I live. So this is not a hoax. This is not a game. This is real. This is happening at the Capitol as we speak. I had my family member call me to really check and make sure that I'm okay, to find out if I knew what was going on in the area. And my answer was no. So I immediately got on board to see what was going on. And now I'm sharing it with you. And I want to thank each and every one of you viewers that's been listening. Please share this broadcast. You need to share what's going on in this country. It will not stop here. So we have to have a level of awareness, and we have to share this, and we have to work together to stop these problems. And Camille, she said, we are looking like a big joke to the rest of the world. Yeah, the whole world is watching. We have to do better. We have to do better, and we have to work together to fix our problems. As I said before, the National Guard, according to NBC, the National Guard has been activated. And of course, there is a curfew for 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in Washington, D.C. So if you have loved ones, friends, or people you know that may live or work in the Washington, D.C. area, please let them know what's going on. Please send them this broadcast, because we want to make sure that they are safe and that they return back to their families and loved ones who are waiting for them to come back home. And so for those of you that's just coming, I want to welcome you to this emergency awareness show that Lotus Roche Ignites is doing here in the Washington, D.C. area. And of course, we do not own the rights to what you've been seeing, what we've been sharing right here on the broadcast from NBC. We don't own the rights to it. What we're sharing with you, NBC is doing live coverage right here in Washington, D.C., showing how the Capitol was stormed. So we do not own the rights to the footage. All credit goes to NBC News here in Washington, D.C. And we're going right back to the broadcaster here live in Washington, D.C. via NBC News.
A secure location, which we cannot reveal. Some of them are together. And in fact, we have reporting that those senators, the group of senators who were together, watched the President-elect Joe Biden's speech together. We also have been informed by one of our reporters on the scene, Kelly O'Donnell, that Vice President Pence is still at the Capitol because it is simply not safe for him to return to the White House. That is the situation in Washington right now. One woman has been shot. It appears to be a protester. That the shot reportedly was from law enforcement. She has been taken to the hospital. We don't have an update on her condition, and that will bring you up to date. Also, an IED, that's an improvised explosive device, according to NBC News, was recovered on the Capitol grounds. Let me get to Congresswoman Liz Cheney, Republican from Wyoming. Congresswoman, you, of course, were an outspoken opponent of the tactics that we saw in terms of the politics, whether the Electoral College vote should be objected to. So you were one who said, it's time now, the election is over, and it's time to perform our constitutional duty. So just so we know where you stand on this, but let's just get to what happened today. Where were you? What did you see? And how are you?
Fine, Savannah. I'm not going to talk about where we are, but we were on the floor of the House of Representatives performing our constitutional duty to count the electoral votes when we had to be evacuated. And we are in a place with bipartisan group of members, and my Democratic counterpart, Hakeem Jeffries, and I have both made clear that we do not intend to allow this kind of mob violence to stop us from carrying out our constitutional duty. Our institutions have got to be defended and protected. We have an oath to the Constitution. Sending an angry, violent mob to disrupt proceedings at the Capitol cannot stand.
When you say sending a mob, who do you believe is responsible? Who sent the mob?
Look, the President of the United States called his supporters to Washington, D.C., and has dispatched them, without telling them to stop it. Now, I believe he has spoken out in the last few minutes, possibly. But we live in a republic that is governed by the rule of law and by our Constitution, and this cannot stand, and it won't stand. We will carry out our constitutional obligation. We'll count the electoral votes, and we all need to remember. We all need to come together. That the republic, the future of the republic, depends upon Americans standing as one, abiding by the Constitution of the United States. We do not bend to mob rule. We don't bend to political threat. There comes a time when our elections are over, and we have to carry out our constitutional duty. And that's the moment that we have arrived at now, and we're going to continue to do that.
Congresswoman, I'm sure, like all of us, you're looking at these images. I mean, the one we have on right now, somebody sitting in the chair where the Senate president presides over the United States Senate, and here's some protester sitting there. Now we've got another shot of some protester sitting in an office with his feet up, literally with his feet up. This is the United States Capitol. This is sacred ground in our democracy. What goes through your mind when you see these images?
Well, it is infuriating, and it's heartbreaking, and it will not stand. We are a democratic republic. We have survived for over 240 years, and we have had the peaceful transfer of power. The peaceful transfer of power is something that Ronald Reagan talked about, that in some instances we take for granted, but it is miraculous. And I think that what we've seen today is that it is something that is very fragile, but that we all must stand for it. The president should immediately make clear that this kind of activity, of violent activity at the Capitol, has to stop, and he ought to make clear that he will abide by the results of the Electoral College vote, and that he will ensure the peaceful transition of power.
Are you, and there will be plenty of time to analyze this later, but just in the moment, as you sit there, sheltered in place, locked down with fellow members of Congress, are you disturbed that this was able to happen at all? that security was such that a group of protesters turned mob could come in and breach the United States Capitol? It isn't as though this wasn't advertised. I mean, this has been boiling and being planned for days and weeks.
Yes, I mean, it obviously is a terrible day in the history of the Republic, but I think what's important to make clear is that we are strong, we're resilient, and we have bipartisan dedication and commitment to protecting and defending the rule of law and to protecting and upholding our oath to the Constitution.
And Congresswoman, forgive me for interrupting, but the president has tweeted. Now I'm told he didn't. He's about to tweet a video statement. Now, he had been urged by members of the Republican caucus, including senators and members such as yourself, to say something.
And so very quickly, I'd like to say thank you to the viewers. Our viewers are making their comments, and I'll bring them up here for you to see. Prior president is making a statement right now, and we're going to go back to the broadcast so you can hear this statement.
Law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election.
Well, I really believe that I think we need to make sure that we really look at the facts and numbers and statistic share the facts. So of course, yes, I cut that off. I have that right to do that. This is my broadcast. This cannot be about blame, folks. This must be about unity and solving the problems. You can say all day that, you know, you disagree with the election, but never in the history of time, have we seen anything like this. Never in the history of time have we seen anything like this.
It is good that
so it's not about blame. It's about helping one another to overcome. And the question has surfaced: should the breach be considered an act of terrorism? And so you can comment below.
You know, it is absolutely counter to the Constitution. And counter to the peaceful transition of power and the values on which this republic was built. We have oaths that we have taken to the Constitution, and we got to uphold those oaths. And
and Congresswoman, I mean, even more than that, I mean, yes, I hear what you're saying, but is it going to get the job done? In other words, is he talking out of both sides of his mouth? He's saying, go home, but you were robbed. You have every right to be angry. This was a fraud. This was stolen. I mean, he's doing two things at once. And the goal here, I think, of the statement, I think what those of you in lockdown right now who would like to get about your business and go on with your day, there's one goal, which is get this thing under control and get the mob out of there.
And so I want to go back because there were two things stated here, okay, with the prior president. We are coming together to bring the country together. And instead of bringing the country together, there are two messages being handed to the people. We cannot work together and bring this country to greatness, not make the country great again, bring this country beyond greatness, but to brilliance. We have to be brilliant. And so the question was this: should the breach be considered an act of terrorism? And I've got Brittany Hardin, and she's saying, and it is an act of terrorism. Okay. And Camilla's saying we have to get together and make this work for our country. And we must work together. We must put aside our differences. Never in the history of this country has it been that because someone has won an election, and we have seen all kinds of elections that may not have seemed to have gone the way that you or I or someone we know or someone that's running for public office may have wanted it to go. But nevertheless, We have shown diplomacy. We have shown ethics. We have shown a stellar character. And we have not stooped to this level of disconnect. So we must work together. And Camille says this is terrorism, and we are united. We are called the United States of America. So we must unite. So I double dare each and every one of you to connect with other people here in the United States, around the world, to help bring about peace. But we first must, of course, bring about peace right here in our own front yards. And I'm calling on all the leaders in the United States. I'm asking you to stand up. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. It is time to stand up because this has gotten totally out of control. We have to restore order. We have to restore order to our country, and we must work together. And so with that said, we're going right back to the broadcast.
For the people, for the vice president and the people in succession, for continuity of government to be taken by Secret Service and Capitol Police out and put in secure locations for their safety is simply shocking. I am as shocked as any other citizen who loves our country and loves democracy, and especially someone who knows the people up there and has worked with them and our own colleagues up there. I just want to say the irony. Here's a statement from the Speaker of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, a government that is, just run by a dictator where people are jailed, journalists and people who are democratic protesters. We follow the events in the USA with concern and invite the parties to calmness, the speaker writes on Twitter. We believe that problems will always be solved within law and democracy. As Turkey, we have always been in favor of the law and democracy, and we recommend it to everyone. This is just a continuation of a government run by this president, his Secretary of State, who have embraced dictators, ignored human rights, ignored the jailings of protesters, women and others who've been tortured in jail in Saudi Arabia. And now we see mob rule in the capital of the United States. It is beyond shocking.
Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, thanks very much. We are about 90 minutes from the curfew that will go into effect at 6 p.m. Eastern time in Washington, D.C. The light already beginning to fade there as there seems to be no break in where we are in terms of what we've been seeing on the front sides of the Capitol. No movement for people to leave or to remove them. And at the same time, there is still business for this Congress to do, to exercise and fulfill its duty to count the electoral vote and essentially confirm this election. I am going to begin preparing for NBC Nightly News. Will be going on the air in a few hours. I'll leave it in the capable hands of Savannah Guthrie, but our NBC News coverage will continue. Savannah, we'll send it to you, and we'll see you in a bit later.
All right, we'll see you on Nightly, Lester. A couple of developments. The FBI SWAT team has now entered the Capitol complex, and our reporter on the Hill, Leanne Caldwell, has tweeted some video of that. So there seems to be some movement on the part of law enforcement to start to get this thing under control. Lester mentioned the 6 o'clock curfew. So while we're talking about law enforcement, let me get to Pete Williams. Pete, bring us up to date, because the governor of Virginia said that requests had come in for the National Guard of Virginia to come in and help. We know the FBI is on the scene. What do you know about what law enforcement is there, what's being brought to bear, and what the plan is here? Because it does seem like we've been in this state of suspended animation where members of the House and Senate are in lockdown, but yet this situation is definitely not under control.
Right. So the Senate and House members are safe and secure. Our understanding is the president of the Senate is still actually in the Capitol complex because it wasn't considered safe to get him out of there yet. So they're all hunkered down in secure locations. As more law enforcement agencies start to come in now, obviously job one will be to get the place emptied out, get everybody out of there. And then job two will be to start looking through the building, making sure that everyone's gone, that all places are safe. they'll have to sweep the rooms and make sure that there's nothing left behind. 2 improvised explosive devices were found not in the Capitol, but on the Capitol grounds, like pipe bomb looking devices. They're being disrupted. We don't know whether they're actually working or hoax devices, but they're simply destroying them. So for those reasons, it's going to take a while. And I just talked to a member of the Senate leadership to say, what are you going to do? Are you going to wait until it's safe to go back into the House chamber? Well, that could be 24 hours. And the answer was, and this is being discussed right now on the leadership of both sides, my understanding is, the sentiment up there right now is we're not leaving. We're going to stay here and do our jobs, even if it means doing it from the 2 secure locations. We know what they are, but we're not reporting them for obvious reasons, where the House members and senators are. So there's, at least right now, the feeling up there is let's keep going. Now the Constitution.
Well, that's interesting.
Say,
wait, Pete. So you're saying, I just want to make sure I'm catching that, because that's, I mean, some of these senators are together, presumably enough for a quorum, since these were the senators who were on the floor. You're saying they might want to just keep it going before this is even under control. They're just going to keep going.
Yes, or at least some point soon. In other words, not wait until the Capitol Police get the whole place cleared out, the whole Capitol swept, and declare it safe for the 2 chambers to come, to be in operation again. Because that could take, as I say, 24 to 48 hours, I suppose 24 hours, to get that, get the House and Senate floor ready for people to come back. But the senators right now, because what I asked this member of the leadership is, what are you going to do? You're going to go home and come back tomorrow? And the feeling was, no, we're going to stay right here and resume our work. Now, I started to say, there's no requirement in the Constitution for where they do this. It just says that it shall be in the presence of the Senate and the House. So the counting. So it could be anywhere. Now, there is a federal law, the Electoral Count Act, that says that it has to be in the House chamber, but they're, exploring ways around that statutory requirement. It's not in the Constitution. So all I can tell you is that right now there's a feeling of let's not leave. I would describe it as sort of defiance that we will not be cowed by this outrageous intrusion into the Capitol. They're determined to keep going. And the person I was talking to said when this was suggested in this group of senators that are in the secure location, there was applause.
Wow. Well, that's a fascinating reporting from inside. Wouldn't you like to be a fly on the wall to see what's happening? Because in that area, in that secure location, are senators who, of course, are on both sides of this issue of whether the Electoral College vote should have been objected to at all. And here they are all together because of this mob that descended on the Capitol. So, and we've heard that sentiment from some of the members that we've talked to on the phone, Pete, saying, if I have to be here all night, we want to get this done. This is our constitutional duty. We heard Tammy Duckworth, a decorated U.S. veteran who lost her legs in combat, saying, nothing will stop me from performing my constitutional duties. But your reporting is pretty extraordinary, Pete, that they are even considering doing it right where they sit, not waiting for the Capitol to be clear, that they seem quite determined to do so. Stand by there, Pete. Keep us posted. Casey, over to you on the Hill. I know you're plugged in. You're our Capitol Hill correspondent. What are you hearing in terms of the security, but also in terms of what the plan is now for the business of the Congress?
Well, Savannah, I'm hearing a sentiment similar to what Pete was just reporting out here, that what had started off today as chaos, some fear, uncertainty, is moving into resolve. An insistence, Joe Manchin told me to not let these thugs take over, that they are going to return to their work. And there are some logistical questions about that, but remember, there are contingency plans for things like this. I mean, we've never necessarily imagined this exact scenario, but in the wake of September 11th, they had to, of course, evacuate members of Congress. And there are a couple of locations in this complex where potentially, and Savannah, I'm not sure, I can hear you in my ear. Our viewers
sorry, that was me.
Hear you as well.
Casey, I'm sorry, that was me talking to the producer. Sorry, carry on. I apologize.
No, of course. So there's an auditorium in a newly built area of the Capitol complex that is large enough to hold people. And again, I want to be careful how I describe things because we are, of course, worried about the security situation. But there are contingencies for the House and the Senate to operate in rooms that are different from what we traditionally think of as the Senate and the House chambers. So, well, yes, obviously the building itself is of incredible symbolic importance. I think that this feeling that they need to do the work no matter where they are or what the circumstances are is very important. So to them, and they are starting to express that now. So we're also starting to hear more questions about, are the Republicans who helped kick this off by saying they would object to this count still planning on doing that? And it's a little bit hard to get answers because everyone is separated from their bosses. There is so much confusion. But again, it does seem like the plan here is to try to go forward. I know there was a brief discussion about trying to evacuate senators from the location where they are using buses. That plan seems to be on hold for the moment. One of our producers saw microphones going into the secure location where the senators are, as though they may be setting up for something where they would be able to talk to reporters that would involve, because again, remember, this debate is supposed to be public as well, and that is an incredibly important feature of the way our government works. And I think that there is also a desire on the part of members of Congress to be seen carrying out their jobs, to demonstrate to the American people that this is what they need to do. And the other thing, Savannah, that I would just add, we're asking for reaction to the president's video. The problem with the president's video, based on some of the people that I have spoken with, is that he doesn't repudiate the basic reality that Joe Biden won the election. Instead, he gives additional credence to what these protesters are here saying has happened. And while he did say that they should leave the building, he did not in any way condemn the message of the disingenuous false message that has prompted them to show up here in the first place. Yeah. So I think there's some concern among members of Congress that what he did doesn't help the situation, as many of them have been calling for, but instead will potentially make it worse. Savannah.
That exactly, and that was the reaction, the fast reaction of Congresswoman Liz Cheney, that it doesn't go far enough if you, on the one hand, say go home, but at the same time you're pouring fuel on the flames by saying that you were robbed, it was stolen, the election was stolen, and that it was fraudulent. That is not what many Republicans have asked the president to do at this moment of crisis in our country. They've asked him to be clear and unequivocal that it's time for the peaceful transition to a new president, as our Constitution and our democracy requires. Let me get to Ellison Barber. She's our correspondent. She's in Washington. I believe she's outside the Capitol. Yeah, hi, Ellison. Ellison, what have you been hearing?
Hey, Savannah. Yeah, so we've been watching just in the last little bit here as we've seen police on this opposite side of the Capitol start to use more tear gas on the crowd that is gathered over there. Not tear gas, we believe it. It seems to be some sort of mace or pepper spray that they're using on the crowd there. We had been told that some of those protesters were possibly breaking windows, and that's what led to the use of that pepper spray. You can see right over here, we're starting now to see Capitol Police gathering here. They seem to be huddling, discussing, possibly getting ready for something. But all evening since we saw those barricades first come down as protesters rushed to the front of the Capitol, Capitol Police have largely kind of stood back. They have, we've seen them kind of waiting up on different parts of the steps there as the protesters made their way up closer. You can see people standing on an armored vehicle here holding flags, the American flag upside down, a Trump 2020 flag just underneath it. About 10 minutes ago, we were up closer to those stairs and somebody came on a bullhorn, a protester, saying that President Trump says that we should go home. He wants you to go home. Other people in the crowd pushed back on that person. And he said, I know, I understand you want to be here, but he's saying that we should go home. Another person then got on top of that armored vehicle and started yelling at people through the bullhorn to come back. So for now, it seems like there is still a large group of people here who do not have any plans to leave in the immediate upcoming future. I mean, this group, it is not as big as it was a couple of hours ago, but there are still people on these steps who seem to have no plans to leave anytime soon. People that we have seen come out claiming to have been inside the U.S. Capitol. They are greeted kind of as heroes by the crowd here when they come out and they talk about their experience inside. And we saw some people actually following, kind of tracking closely behind a few police in riot gear, calling them traitors for whatever happened inside the U.S. Capitol and berating them as they made their way across the front here.
Consulting. Again, folks, this is your girl Lotus Roche from Lotus Roche Ignites, and I want to welcome all the viewers all over the world. I have people streaming in from all over the world, and this is a broadcast of awareness to let you know what's going on right here in Washington, D.C. I am here in Washington, D.C., and this is what's going on. So please make sure you comment, like, share, start a watch party. Let people know, especially if you have family and friends that live or work in the Washington, D.C. area. Let them know what's going on. Let them know to stay away from the capital area if at all possible. I am utilizing the broadcast from NBC. I do not own the rights for the broadcast. And of course, the views expressed from the NBC News broadcast, they are not necessarily my views or of the Lotus Roche Ignite show. We are not responsible or liable for their statements. This broadcast is for education and awareness purposes only. And again, we do not own the rights to the footage or anything like that. We give all credit to NBC, who is actually there on the scene live, sharing the broadcast with us now, right here in Washington, D.C. This is not a hoax. This is not a game. This is not a gimmick. This is actually happening right now, and we're going right back to the broadcast.
Around the Capitol. I have requested both the Virginia State Police and the Maryland State Police to deploy officers, and they have engaged immediately to deploy officers to the Metropolitan Police Department to help regain control of the United States Capitol. I have also invoked several days ago a standing mutual aid agreement with our surrounding jurisdictions, and I want to thank them for deploying. Those jurisdictions include Arlington County, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, as well as Baltimore City. We want to thank them for sending their officers in, assisting us with public safety in the district, as well as the response to United States Capitol building. Additionally, I want to acknowledge and thank the New Jersey State Police, who will also be assisting the Metropolitan Police Department. So with that, I want to turn to Chief Conti for a situational update. Secretary of the Army will make comments, and we will take brief questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, and thank you, Mayor Bowser. My name is Robert J. Conti III. I am the Chief of the Police of the Metropolitan Police Department here in Washington, D.C. As you are aware, demonstrators came to our city this morning to exercise their First Amendment rights and were largely concentrated in the area of the National Mall. Following the president's remarks, a large crowd began to march eastbound on Madison Avenue Northwest and Constitution Avenue Northwest. As the demonstrators approached the United States Capitol grounds, there was a noticeable change in their demeanor. They breached the fencing along the U.S. Capitol grounds and confronted police lines surrounding the building. MPD was requested by the United States Capitol Police to provide assistance with crowd management, and due to the violent behavior towards the police officers there and their intent on gaining access to the Capitol, a riot was declared. It was clear that the crowd was intent on causing harm to our officers by deploying chemical irritants on police to force entry into the United States Capitol building. As you are aware, they were able to gain access to the Capitol building, and I can confirm that one civilian was reported to have sustained a gunshot wound inside of the Capitol. Details of the shooting are not immediately available, and the situation remains under investigation. The Metropolitan Police Department will be taking the lead on that investigation. MPD continues to provide personnel resources and assistance on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol and has requested the assistance of law enforcement partners through a previously in place mutual aid agreement. As you heard from the mayor, a 6 p.m. curfew has been put in place tonight and will be in effect until 6 a.m. tomorrow, January 7th. We are advising everyone that is not engaged in essential activity to get off the streets and adhere to the curfew. If you are found to be in violation of the curfew, police will be required to take action. Again, I want to reiterate and make it clear, please abide by the curfew that the mayor has set in place, or people will be subject to arrest. Lastly, I know that many of you are familiar with the Metropolitan Police Department. Understand that there is no better agency in the country to handle First Amendment events. They happen on a regular basis here in our city. However, today's events were not representation of peaceful protests. Today, what we witnessed was unlawful, riotous behavior. And people that come to our city engaged in unlawful behavior will be held accountable. We can take any questions that you may have after the secretary has a chance to speak.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser, Chief Conti. At around 3 o'clock this afternoon, we mobilized the DC National Guard to 100% strength. We'll have 1,100 personnel that are convening to the Armory as we speak to support Metro PD and reestablishing the safety and the confines of the U.S. Capitol. We'll also be working with other federal law enforcement entities that are going to be coming here to the Metropolitan Police Station to add additional support and capability as they continue deliberate planning and looking at how a clearing operation will be conducted. Thank you.
And how does this work? This phone? Okay.
So Evan from Fox 5 in Maryville to repeat the question.
Okay.
Evan, did you want to say his name?
Evan?
Yeah, hi, Mayor and Chief Conti. Could you please speak to the confusion surrounding the deployment of the National Guard? We understand that the council put out a statement saying that originally the Department of Defense
We've been listening into a news conference from the mayor of Washington, D.C. and several officials, including the head of the Metropolitan Police Department, and with their plans on how to get this under control. The National Guard in D.C. has been activated, as we just learned. The Metropolitan Police Chief was very clear that what had started as lawful demonstrations quickly escalated as a group of protesters came close to the Capitol. He said that violent behavior toward police unfolded, including the firing of the irritants, some kind of irritants toward police, which allowed them to breach the fence and the police line. And according to the chief of police, a riot was declared. He said this town is very used to people coming and protesting and exercising their First Amendment rights. This was not that. This was a riot, according to Metropolitan Police. And we're learning a bit more now about the plans to get this under control. It involves National Guard, it involves FBI, it involves the Metropolitan Police Department, it involves the Capitol Police. We've heard word of the Virginia National Guard being called in, or at least requested. We'll see if we start to see some of that personnel. Let me turn to Janet Napolitano for purposes of the discussion here, former Homeland Security Secretary in the Obama administration. And Secretary Napolitano, first of all, just your thoughts. I mean, you aren't near Washington, I don't think, or not in the Capitol, but when you see these images and what has unfolded today, as a former Homeland Security official whose job was to protect the homeland, what do you think?
Oh, it's a dark day for our country. And, you know, when I was Secretary of Homeland Security, we did all kinds of scenario planning for attacks on the homeland. But this is akin to an attack from inside the homeland on the function of our democracy, on our government. And like I said, it is a dark day.
I mean, when you see that the Senate and the House have to be evacuated, that the session has to be stopped, it is an extraordinary moment. And I, of course, don't want to ask for any inside information, but if you could help us as the former Homeland Security understand, you know, what kind of planning is underway for this kind of situation. Perhaps this couldn't be imagined, where American citizens, our own people, would storm the Capitol and put in danger members of the United States Congress and their staffs. But certainly an attack on the Capitol is something you would have had to contemplate in your past job.
Certainly, and there are procedures in place for what's called continuity of government to secure the members of the House and the Senate. Should there be an attack, these were procedures.
Hi, I'm okay. Go to my page. I'm broadcasting what's going on here in Washington, D.C.
You know, it's
Period.
Interesting to me.
Several
however,
people have stormed the Capitol.
And there'll
Period.
be after action reports on this up the wazoo, but it was very foreseeable that there was going to be tremendous protest activity in Washington today, incited by the president himself. And one has to question what kind of pre-event planning went on. Certainly the presence of law enforcement now is arriving, and they're absolutely essential, and we absolutely need them. But I'm just comparing it to the way law enforcement handled the event at Lafayette Park last spring, when the president dispersed peaceful protesters to go do his photo op at the church, holding the Bible. It's a pretty stark contrast, and I think it illustrates a lot about the current administration.
What did you think of the president's remarks? Was that sufficient in your mind to quell the violence, to calm it, to call it off, and to try to get this under control?
No. The president lost this election. That result has been confirmed by every court that has considered the dozens of challenges. The electors have been selected. The votes have been certified by the states. By the way, it's the states who run elections, and it's the states who certify electors. The purpose of today's convening of the joint chambers is almost ceremonial in nature. It's to receive those certified votes, to open the envelopes and to count them. That's it. It's not a place of objection or allegations of fraud. That's the courts of the United States, and the courts have ruled. So this is over. And what the president should have done is to say that he respects the rule of law, he respects our processes, he respects that on January 20th, Joe Biden will take office as the president of the United States, and these protesters, and I'm almost reluctant to call them protesters, it's really a mob. But they should disperse and go home. And by the way, those who have committed acts of violence, broken windows, etc., they should be identified and prosecuted.
Well, the head of the Metropolitan Police Department in D.C. called them rioters. Secretary Napolitano, thank you for being with us. Yeah, it does seem in the case of those who breached the line and trespassed into the United States Congress, where the public is not allowed. Yeah, that seems an apt description. Thank you, Secretary. I want to say that we've been watching this image on the Capitol grounds, and it does look like some people are being escorted out now by law enforcement. And I want to go to Ellison Barber, who's there. What are you seeing? What's your vantage point?
Hey, Savannah. Yeah, so we saw these police officers in riot gear make their way up the U.S. Capitol steps and started to talk to some of the people that were still there and have gotten them to go down the steps and clear that area with them. There was not a huge group on the steps at the time that the police came up. A lot of people in this area have left, and they say they're heading up to the Supreme Court. But they came out in riot gear and were able to kind of slowly push people back off of the steps now down to this area. And it seems like everyone has left as they were asked to. Right before this happened, we did hear someone go on a bullhorn, we were telling you earlier, and say President Trump has said that people should go home and tell people here that they should go home. Some people disagreed with that and pushed back. But obviously, as the police have come out in their riot gear here, at least on the steps at this part of the U.S. Capitol, the people who were up there have come down now. And I don't know if you can see if we can walk a little this way. We don't want to get too close, but I don't know if you can see some of what's been left on these cars that are over here. People have put up signs as they had this is really the first time this area has kind of been cleared out today, but you can see some of the signs on the cars back there saying things like Pelosi is Satan. People have been standing on top of that car, that armored vehicle in the middle for most of the day. They have now come down though, and it seems like perhaps Capitol Police for the first time in quite a few hours have started to get back control of this area. And for now, they're standing up there. Some people you can see standing in front of them with the join or die flag, not leaving entirely, but they have backed them down from up near the front of the door where they had been for so many hours now. Savannah?
Ellison, you said somebody got on a bullhorn and said President Trump said to go home. Was that law enforcement or was that a fellow protester? Who said that? Could you tell?
That was a protester, Savannah. They were actually like kind of in the middle of the stairs, and they came on and they said President Trump posted this. Somebody else said no. He said President Trump said he doesn't want any violence. They yelled, "We're not being violent." Then somebody else, disagreeing with the person telling people to go home, stood up on top of that black armored vehicle and started yelling at people who were leaving to come back, saying that they needed to fight, that they needed to do this to be patriots and to come back. Some people stayed. A lot of people, though, dispersed. But it was interesting to see because they kind of went back and forth within their own group, some saying, okay, maybe we should go home, others saying, no, absolutely not. And we do know that a lot of the people who were here, as well as on the other side here on the Capitol, where we did see people getting pepper sprayed pretty frequently in the last hour or so, they have started to leave. And we've been told by other protesters here that they are making their way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is just across the street here. Savannah.
All right, Allison, thank you so much. Stand by there for us, would you? I want to get to Kenneth Buck, who is Colorado's congressman, a Republican, a Trump supporter. Sir, first of all, how are you? Oh, we can see you. That's good news. How are you doing? Are you safe?
I am safe. My staff is safe. We are hunkered down with another office, and we are safe, anxious, and happy that we can see the TV and see what's going on in the Capitol.
Well, Congressman, if you're in your office, I presume you were not on the House floor when this unfolded. What was your vantage point? What was your view of the events as they unfolded from where you sat?
Yeah, I was on the House floor. I was one of the people set to speak, and so I was sitting on the House floor. First thing I saw was the Capitol Police, plainclothes Capitol Police, escorted the Speaker from the chair. We continued with the proceedings for a few minutes. The Capitol Police then came on the House floor and announced that the doors had been locked in the chamber and everybody should stay in place. About 10 minutes later, we were told to put on our gas masks, and a few minutes after that, the windows of the doors around the House were being shattered. It was hard to tell whether it was gunfire at first or whether it was just a glass breaking, and it appears now that it was just glass breaking. And a bunch of us got heavy furniture and started barricading the doors to help the Capitol Police. Soon after that, probably about 15 minutes, we were told that they anticipated that the House chambers would be breached and asked us to evacuate. And so we evacuated through the tunnel.
I mean, what you have just described, Congressman, is so extraordinary. You describe it in a very matter-of-fact way, but could you have imagined when you woke up this morning that something like this could have happened? What was going through your mind? Here you are about to perform that sacred duty, addressing the House floor as an elected member of Congress, and then this happens.
Yeah, I anticipated that there would be violence outside the Capitol. I did not anticipate there would be violence inside the Capitol. And I really, peaceful protests, we've seen them for months in this country, and we've also seen terrible violence. And the violence that happened in the Capitol and the people that trespassed and caused damage and caused harm to others should absolutely be prosecuted. And it's incredibly aggravating and disturbing that as a country that believes in free speech and believes in the Republican form of government that we have, that we are forced to tolerate this nonsense. It is absolutely unacceptable.
You heard the president's remarks. What did you think of them?
I was glad that the president instructed his followers to leave, go home, and peacefully disperse. I think that it is time that we anticipate a peaceful transition to the next administration. And I hope all Americans understand that while many of us are frustrated with some of the processes in this election, the results of the election stand, and we need to respect those results.
Congressman, stand with me, but I am showing an image that I believe to be a live picture where we saw some smoke and perhaps flashbang. So there does seem to be some action on the grounds there where you sit, and we'll keep our eye on that. But let's keep talking. You talked about the president. He made the statement. He did tell people to go home. At the same time, he said, "I know your pain. I know you're hurt." He said this election was stolen from us. It's fraudulent. And he called these protesters, some of whom have, as you well know, breached the United States Capitol and forced Congress to evacuate and disband and not be able to perform its duties. He said they were special people and he loved them. So I ask you, I know you're a Republican and a supporter, but I mean, was that enough for you?
I think the Attorney General Barr made a very strong statement. I think there were other strong statements that have been made, and certainly you can look at the president's statement. And I think in totality, he was calling for peace, and he was calling for people to disband. You know, I am frustrated right now where I'm sitting that I can't do more. I pray for these police officers who have put their lives on the line, and I just hope that these protesters and those who are in the building, I would consider them criminals. I hope they go home. I hope they understand that there will be consequences for what they've done.
I mean, do you feel angry? It's a violation. It's here you are, the member of Congress, and the Congress convening to perform this duty that's in the Constitution, age old as our democracy itself. And here come a bunch of folks coming in and putting a stop to it.
Absolutely, I'm angry. This isn't the way that this country operates, and it is a disgrace, and it's a disgrace for anyone to tolerate anybody to come in and try to shut down our government. It is absolutely disgraceful.
Go ahead. Oh, sorry, I was just about to wrap you up because I want to get to those live pictures, but I mean to interrupt. Final thought.
Final thought is God bless America. I don't have much else to say.
God bless America, indeed. Sir, thank you. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. I do want to go to these pictures. This is the west front of the Capitol, and you see the smoke is building, and this being a live situation unfolding. I don't have a ton of information about what exactly has transpired, but you see the flash there. Sometimes a flashbang is used by law enforcement to try to disperse a crowd. It's obviously one of the tactics in their tool belt, and it seems we saw the FBI SWAT team come in earlier. Brian, I think no question that they are trying to bring this now to an end and say it's enough. Time to try to clear the Capitol and get back to business. Pete Williams, our justice correspondent who covers law enforcement. Pete, you have a more trained eye for what we're seeing here, and you certainly have sources inside the law enforcement agencies. What do you see?
Yeah, I can't really be sure where the flashbangs were being set off, whether it was there on the portico, I guess you would call it, or not the portico, but the balcony or whatever that is outside the Capitol or inside. But there was certainly smoke that blew. It did appear to be a smoke grenade or a flashbang and not the deployment of a chemical irritant like tear gas. But you know, from this low vantage point, it's hard to tell whose it was. I assume it's law enforcement's. The reason I'm somewhat unsure is that we've been told that several, possibly more than 2 improvised explosive devices have been found on the Capitol grounds. I would think if it was something like that, people would be scattering, and they're not. So that leads me to believe that it probably is law enforcement. And if the intent of it is to get people to move away, it's not having an immediate effect. But I think the other thing that's interesting in this picture is the number of law enforcement people now. We're finally starting to see a definite show of force, a large deployment. All those yellow vests are, I assume, law enforcement, or at least people, official people that are trying to get that crowd moved out of there. So we're starting to see a much bigger deployment. We know that other law enforcement people are coming. They're coming from nearby states. We've just been told that the New Jersey State Police are now sending about 50 people. The FBI's there, the Secret Service there, Homeland Security. Just about every 3-letter law enforcement organization in the DC area is there. And, I think one of the questions is going to be why has it taken so long to get them there and to kind of coordinate how this is going to work? It does seem, Savannah, from all the pictures we've seen today, now people seems like they're definitely being pushed back. From all the pictures we've seen today, it does seem like
If you are wondering, yes, this is a live chain of events that's happening right here in Washington, D.C., where the Capitol was rushed today and breached today. And of course, we don't own the rights to the footage. It is being furnished by NBC to the world. And we are just showing this so that people are aware and so that they can help people stay safe and make sure that they are out of that area, stay away from that area if you can help it. There has been a mandatory curfew enacted by Mayor Bowser here in Washington, D.C. for 6 p.m. 6 p.m. There was an announcement made earlier today encouraging people to stay home. They have SWAT, they have all types of teams from neighboring communities and neighboring states that are working on this. And as night falls, this is what you see right here in front of you. And this is what you saw earlier today as it was crowded when it was breached, and you see the police and all are up on the stairs. So this is live. I want you to know that this is live. And if you have someone in the Washington, D.C. area that you love or care about, make sure you let them know that there is a curfew. Many people have gone back to work, so they may not know. They may not even be aware. I wasn't even aware initially about what was going on until a family member called me to tell me about what was going on right here in my own front yard, because I live right here in Washington, D.C. So please let your family members, friends, folks that you love, even your frenemies, let them know to stay away from the area. And the curfew is set for 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, I did not own the rights for the footage. It is live on NBC, and I would imagine every news broadcasting facility is showing this right now. And the views expressed from NBC News broadcast are not necessarily the views of Lotus Richey Ignites. We are not responsible or liable for their statements or their views. This broadcast is intended for education and awareness purposes. And we are going right back to the broadcast live right here on Washington, D.C.
Calling for the restoration of peace, calling for President Trump to tell his supporters to leave the Capitol. And President Trump issued a video on Twitter saying that it was time for them to go home. He also, though, said the election had been stolen from them and was fraudulent, but he said it was time to go home. And that is the state of things as we speak. Let me go to Casey Hunt on Capitol Hill. Casey, there's still important matters for Congress to conduct. The last we checked in with you, these members of Congress were still being told to shelter in place. Vice President Pence, at our last knowledge, was still on the United States Capitol grounds because it wasn't safe for him to go back to the White House. That information's a couple hours old now. But is there a plan? And Pete Williams had reported from a source inside one of those Senate hold rooms, one of that Senate shelter in place rooms, that there were senators discussing whether they could just conduct their business from that undisclosed location and just carry on the business of the country anyway with a somewhat defiant attitude. What are you hearing now?
Yeah, I've heard similar, Savannah. I've talked to both House and Senate members, or texted with them, I should say, as they've been trying to figure out what to do. And the first step was to wait for this law enforcement presence to show up, which they clearly have, and the process of that is underway. There is a long list of agencies. Pete walked through some of them that are here that we have seen in the hallways. I mean, it is extraordinarily surreal to see FBI SWAT teams running through hallways that are supposed to be secured, that are supposed to be our corridors of power, literally, where they have been overrun by these rioters and are no longer able to actually exercise that power the way our Constitution says that they should be able to. So you're looking at some of it here. I mean, I never thought I would see anything like this coming from.
So they've got the FBI, they've got SWAT, they've got the National Guard, they've got police forces from surrounding areas, just to name a few. So again, this is real. This is what's really happening here in the United States at the Capitol.
Senators actually have the Electoral College votes with them in this undisclosed location. I'm told that a Senate staffer actually was the one who thought to grab them. And remember, this is a pretty old, arcane process, the counting of the Electoral College votes. And think back to when they would have put this law in place. I mean, Pete Williams called it the oldest, one of the oldest functions of our government. They would have been bringing these certificates from across the country on horseback. They would have been concerned about whether the people charged with getting them to the right place were able to survive their journeys. I know it may sound dramatic, but that was the circumstances that they were dealing with. And it's part of why the law is written to send several copies of these certificates out there. But what it means is that those physical items are imbued with very important characteristics, right? They come here, they open, this is what Congress is supposed to do. They open the envelopes, they read the numbers, they figure out what they say, and they put down the official tally. And yes, we don't necessarily need to do it that way now in the age of the internet, but that's how we do it here in the country. So the physical manifestation of those is very important, and somebody just grabbed them on the way out and took them to this secure location, Savannah.
Well, you know, I think that's actually quite poignant, Casey. I mean, it's not just a matter of ceremony, or in some ways it is, but at this really dark moment in our country, it calls into mind our history, and that this democracy, this only, you know, few hundred years old, is fragile, as we've heard many of our leaders say today. And that notion of somebody just grabbing those electoral votes, which of course represent the will of the people and the voters who came and exercised their precious right to vote. You know, it actually, I think it really puts things into sharp relief at this extraordinary moment in our country. And Casey, honestly, there are probably folks tuning in here who are just living their lives. We're in the midst of a pandemic. We have an actual crisis going on, a health crisis in our country. And now there's this crisis that did not have to happen. To catch people up who may have not been following this as closely as you do every day, this electoral college vote that was to take place today, there was no suspense about the outcome. The votes are in, they've been certified, the legal challenges have been mounted. They've been mounted, they've been rejected. Recounts have been requested, the recounts have happened, the audits have happened. All of the legal remedies that could be exercised had been exercised, and this was supposed to be just the final moment where it's almost like a rubber stamp, where the electoral votes are read and certified, and then in 2 weeks we have an inauguration. Bring us up to date on what a core of Republicans were trying to do today and what the ramifications of that are.
Savannah, as the morning unfolded, you know, I came into the Capitol as usual, and there were some protesters around, but frankly, protesting is a pretty common thing here in Washington. I've seen a lot of it. It's not usually an issue. It didn't seem abnormal or out of the ordinary, but the process that was about to be undertaken here today was from the start of the day historic. We were expecting to see and did see an objection to the counting of the Electoral College votes. And normally this only takes about a half an hour. This is, I believe, the fourth one of these that I've been up here for. It's the first one I even really remember, although I remember seeing the mahogany boxes go by in past election cycles. But of course, President Trump had urged his supporters to question the integrity of the election, to try and fight back. Stop the steal is the phrase that they have been using. And while everything got off to what seemed like a normal start here in the building, the objection was made. The way the process works, all members of Congress were together in a joint session. Once the objection was made, they were to separate to their respective chambers. This is all laid out very carefully in the law. Each chamber was to debate for 2 hours this objection and then take a vote on whether or not these electoral college votes were properly cast and should be counted. And we know that there were Republicans, many of them prepared to vote that no, those electoral votes should not be counted. However, Mitch McConnell actually opened the debate on the Senate floor by saying that it was time to put this all behind us, that if, in fact, they continued with the objection to the counting of the votes, to certifying President-elect Joe Biden as the president, that our country would end up in a death spiral. That was the phrase that he used. Our democracy would end up in a death spiral. And just moments later, we saw protesters, rioters rushing the Capitol, eventually breaching both the House and Senate floors, now leaving us with lawmakers in hiding, unable to conduct the business of the country, and an uncertain outcome in terms of how law enforcement is going to finally put an end to all of this. Savannah.
All right, Casey, thank you. Let's take a pause right here. I'm going to turn coverage over to Chuck Todd, our political director, host of Meet the Press, to carry it on. We'll check back in with you, Chuck, in just a couple of moments. I'll send it to you.
All righty. Thank you, Savannah. Let's go now down to Vaughn Hilliard. He's on the west side of the Capitol. Vaughn, paint a picture for us. What are you seeing right now? Tell us what's going on.
We're looking at 6 p.m. curfew. Essentially,
Vaughn.
Well, while they're getting that together, a couple of questions came about. Who do you think should be held responsible for this breach? Comment down below. Now, we're dealing with grown people who have a mind of their own. No one can stop them from doing what they want to do, but of course, people can encourage them to do what they do. So that's the question that people seem to want to know the answer to. Well, comment down below with what your answer is. And in the meantime, we're going to go back to the broadcast. They seem to have lost a little audio right now, or they lost their way for a few minutes, but I think they're back with some audio. So we're going to hear what they have to say.
To the first floor of the Senate, where I encountered, I was stunned to encounter a group of protesters trying to make their way up the steps into the Senate, to the second floor of the Senate. And I saw this police officer courageously try to hold them off with nothing but a baton, but was ultimately unable to do so. And the protesters chased them up the steps, where there was a sort of a standoff, and right steps away from the Senate floor. These protesters were carrying Confederate flags. They were yelling traitors. They were saying that, they needed to stop this from happening in order to make Trump president. Really just shocking scenes. At one point, a few of them got into the Senate chamber itself and got up to the day where Mike Pence was presiding minutes earlier to take photos and to scream that this was Donald Trump's election. It's really stunning scenes.
Igor, I'm seeing you've caught some pictures. There clearly is some Capitol Police that was there at the time. Were they aggressively trying to push them back, or did they feel overwhelmed, or what could you observe at the time? How are the Capitol Police handling what they had? Were they just overwhelmed?
I think initially they were overwhelmed and unaware, frankly, some of them, that protesters had gotten into the Capitol. I took this video of this lone police officer trying to hold back this group of 15 to 20 protesters, and finally receive backup, yelling that they've gotten in. When he did receive backup, they tried to de-escalate the situation, tried to talk to them to calm them down, but ultimately they would not leave, and eventually roamed across the Capitol into the rotunda and into the Senate chamber itself.
Igor, are you safe? Where are you right now?
I am safe, thank you. I'm at a secure location. I'm outside the Capitol. I'm holding here, and we're all trying to see what comes next tonight.
Well, Igor Bobak, thanks for sharing your photos with the world, getting us these photos. There's a lot more we need to unpack with this. You stay safe. And of course, thank you for your brave reporting. Let me bring in Akeem Jeffries. He's
Thanks, Camille, for always letting me know if I'm muted. So, folks, I want to thank you for tuning in to what's going on thus far. I greatly appreciate you tuning in. We're going to take a break for a while, and then we're going to come back with some coverage of the coverage later on tonight. So stay tuned and ask yourself some real questions. What can we do to help ourselves in this country to solve the problems that we're having, where people are now storming the Capitol, doing things that we never saw ever in the history of the United States? You know, there have been all type of protests and march on Washington, peaceful marches, but nothing like this or to this magnitude where people have stormed and gained entry to the Capitol. So, with that being said, I want to thank you for sharing your time and your thoughts with me, and we'll see you back real soon later this evening for a recap of what's going on here in Washington, D.C. Thank you, and see you soon.